Welcome back to ＳիվիլNet. I'm Patrick Elliott, and we're joined again by Eric Hacopian, our friend of the show and political commentator. Eric, thanks for hopping back on with us.
It's a pleasure.
So we're continuing our coverage of the situation on the ground in Artsakh. Can you give us an update? What's going on? What do we know? What do we not know as of recording this, which is on Thursday?
What we know is that things are horrendous. The airport now in Stepanakert is full of refugees that have been chased away, ethnically cleansed from the villages that they were in parts of Artsakh that have been occupied over the last couple of days. The tragedy is a lot of these people were in villages, so they had the ability to feed themselves, and now they're essentially refugees without ability to feed themselves. So it's a horrendous situation. There's an absolute shortage of everything. A mass uncertainty. The general bombing has stopped, at least in Stepanakert, but there was intensive shooting this afternoon or this midday into Stepanakert. The scariest thing is we do not know of, there's a lot of missing people. We do not know what's going on in outlying villages of people who stayed behind, what's happening with them, are they being murdered, tortured, or half a dozen different things. So I suspect there are horrors going on, but we don't necessarily know all of them at this point.
What about the negotiations at the barrel of a gun in Yevlakh between the Artsakh authorities, Russian delegation, and Azerbaijan?
That's a complete fraud. We should not give these quote-unquote negotiations any legitimacy whatsoever. This is the equivalent of the residents of the Warsaw Ghetto negotiating with the Nazis. There's no... the only thing that this is designed to do is to give a legalistic stamp of approval to ethnic cleansing and genocide, to say that this was negotiated. The people who were there have been forced to go there by the Russians. I do not think they represent the will of the people of Artsakh. This entire process is a fraud. It should be denounced as a fraud, and any agreement that comes out of it is a fraud.
One thing that is of note is that one of the chief negotiators, there's two of them, one of the representatives of Artsakh, he also happens to be the head of the Russian-Armenian Friendship Union in Karabakh, which is essentially just a Russian lobby, pro-Russia lobby group there. So
use your imagination.
Yeah. I want to touch up a little bit on Prime Minister Pashinyan's speech today, since it's marking Independence Day in obviously a very dour mood. What do you make of his speech as addressed to the nation?
It was a disgrace.
There's a passage in particular that I wanted to run by you. It says, this is of course the English translation, "Many believe that in this tense regional environment, in the face of occasional military conflicts, it is not adequate to talk about peace. But particularly in these conditions, peace should be valued, and peace should not be confused with a truce or a ceasefire. Peace is an environment that is free from conflicts, interstate, interethnic conflicts." What do you make of this, especially today of all days?
Well, he's 100% correct, but 100% irrelevant. At this point, the issue isn't peace, it's security. Peace is, way down the line. What matters today is security and the country's and the nation's ability to defend itself against gangster regimes. So there's no such thing as a peace agenda. One of the most dangerous things in politics is to believe your own bullshit, and I think that's what we're dealing with here. There is no peace agenda. At this point, there's a defeat and humiliation agenda. The entire focus of the nation has to be on rebuilding our defenses and the ability to defend ourselves, and to the extent that we can, protect and save the people of Artsakh. All this other stuff is just absolute nonsense, and I'm not even sure if he believes it at this point.
Can you tell us a little bit about what's going on with our Western partners? I mean, are we hearing, especially after Mrs. Yuri Kim made her famous statement in Congress when she was testifying, saying that that the United States will not allow for ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh. It's almost a direct quote of what she said just a few days ago.
Well, I don't know about the EU. I haven't had any contacts there, but I know in the United States they've gone complete radio silence. They're not communicating with people that they were communicating with before. I mean, this is people outside of the Armenian government. But they And I suspect what this is about is for very specific legal reasons, because since we're in the midst of this genocide and there's the responsibility to protect, and there's obviously lots of conversations back and forth, messages back and forth about this and about what's about to happen, and the lack of action, which is actually illegal, you cannot put out statements that are going to be contradicted with what you're saying in private that at some point is going to get leaked, and as with any secret documents, they eventually become declassified. So I think this radio silence is deliberate, and it's probably done under legal counsel to make essentially the leadership of the State Department and the United States foreign policy directly liable for not acting to stop a genocide that they already knew about, which they have a legal responsibility to do so.
Eric, I want to touch up on, well, since we're on the subject of the United States, I mean, should the Armenian communities in the U.S. mobilize in mass, since you've got a massive voter bloc and you have elections coming up?
They should raise hell. I mean, they should raise hell. You know, it's at this point, the United States government is the only entity that can stop this genocide. And at this point, they are enablers of it. You know, the country that 1.5 million Armenians live in and pay taxes and is enabling the second Armenian genocide. And that's just the truth at this point. And this is not a happy thing for me, because I'm myself an American citizen. But that's the truth, and we have to deal with it.
What do you, I mean, we're still waiting, based on our current time in Armenia, for the United Nations Security Council session that was called to discuss the situation. Can you talk to us a little bit about it, unpack it? What are your expectations? What do you think should come from it?
Well, the Insecurity Council is apparently meeting at 11 p.m. Armenia time.
They're not in any hurry, obviously.
Yeah, no, I think I'm not optimistic. I mean, what you're looking for, what is needed is boots on the ground to protect civilians from genocide. That's not in the cards, because it'll be vetoed by Russia under any scenario, even if others were for it. I think what is critical that can come out of it, one, is to draw a red line on attacking civilians and ethnic cleansing, violent ethnic cleansing in this case. Secondly, is to establish a humanitarian corridor that delivers food and allows people in and out, and whatever the situation ends up being. And third is to have direct international presence in the ground, the United Nations presence in the ground as a witness to what's going on. Those are the three things that if any of them come out of this, it's useful. I suspect some of these things will not be vetoed by the Russians, because we had similar cases in Syria in which they actually, even though they were supporting Assad, and in this case they're supporting Ilham, there's certain things that they have a hard time opposing, and I think a humanitarian corridor or food supplies might be something that they can oppose. But I think anything that interferes with their presence from a security perspective, and at this point they're a source of insecurity, they will veto. So we will see what comes of it, but we should not expect too much from this.
Have you heard of the leaks from the Medusa, the Russian opposition papers, right, where they're talking about how the Kremlin has issued essentially direct orders to all of their media apparatus, and they're obviously state-owned, on how to frame the onslaught on Artsakh, how to blame the Armenian side, in particular the Prime Minister Pashinyan and the Armenian government in Yerevan. And it's quite interesting. I mean, as of the preliminary tallies, they've lost at least 8 peacekeepers. So 8 peacekeepers have been killed. This is the first time they've ever been killed on duty in Artsakh. And one of them is supposed to be the deputy commander of the peacekeeping contingent over there. And they've already started spinning it as it being Armenia's fault. So what are your thoughts on this kind of chilling coordination between the Russian state and the media apparatus to demonize the democratic government here?
Well, Medusa is a great Russian dissident site, and they actually do great work. Some of the best journalists in Russia work there because they can't work in their country any longer. But again, it's just a living example of what we know. The assault on Artsakh, the genocide in Artsakh, is the work of 2 states at this point, the Baku-Moscow alliance. They are responsible for this. They're the ones carrying it out. And what the Medusa Papers prove is the proof of that. If you're coordinating media coverage of an area in which your peacekeepers should be defending, coordinating the attack on that area it shows complete complicity with the aggressors. And I don't know if you noticed, but all over Baku, when they were celebrating their victory,
Russian flags,
they were walking, with their victory over essentially a war that is a giant refugee camp. They were driving around with Russian flags. So it's not that hard to figure out who's doing what with whom.
I want to add one thing to what you said. You said it's a Moscow-Baku axis. I want to add just two other culprits, is both Turkey and Israel. We should not forget. Turkey is expected, but for Israel, we could say, okay, they were sending weapons, in return they get to observe Iran, but these are the children of genocide survivors, knowing full well that the Azeris intend to continue after 2020. It's not really debatable. They knew what these weapons were for, and during the onslaught, they were continuing supplying them with weapons. This we should not forget.
Yeah, but why would anyone have any expectations of them at this point anyway?
Yeah. Before we conclude, I want to ask you, Eric, do you know the story of Ivan the Terrible?
Yes, I know of him, but not the story.
All right. Well, I'm a student of history, and one of the most interesting. He has a very interesting rise to power. When his parents died when he was a teenager, and so he used to walk into the Russian court, and he would play with dolls. And he would drool, and he would babble. So they assume he's an idiot. So the boyars started to get confident, they started to get comfortable, they started to abuse power, and they expected when he would ascend the throne, they would have just a puppet that they can manipulate and continue. And of course, when he ascended to the throne at 16, his eyes rolled back, and he unleashed his vengeance. And that's when he became known as the Ivan the Terrible, with his subsequent conquests. In my opinion, I think that what Armenia's trajectory needs to be now is we need to keep our heads down, focus tirelessly, think of the long game, and remember that we're going to have our day.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, listen, what we have learned is that the world demands of us hatred and vengeance. That's what they want. That's what they respect. I think we need to internalize those values and give it back to the world with interest when the time comes. Everything else is conversation.
Thanks again for hopping on, Eric. And thank you, everyone, for joining in at CivilNet. We will keep you posted, and we'll check in with you guys very soon.